The old house stood on a bluff overlooking the churning gray expanse of the Atlantic, a monument to a time and a family now all but forgotten. Alex Marlow, the last of his line, had arrived with a U-Haul trailer, packed with a life he was eager to leave behind. A life of dead-end jobs, a crumbling relationship, and a nagging sense of being adrift. His great-aunt Eleanor's death had been unexpected, but the inheritance was a lifeline. The grand, decaying Victorian mansion in coastal Maine. A fresh start. The cold, salt-laden air hit him as he stepped out of the truck, the smell of decaying wood and sea brine mingling in his nostrils. The house loomed, its dark windows like vacant eyes staring out at the stormy sky. A sense of unease settled in his stomach, but he dismissed it as the natural anxiety of a massive life change. Inside, the house was a mausoleum of memories. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, slicing through the grimy windows, illuminating antique furniture draped in white sheets. The air was thick and stagnant, heavy with the scent of old paper and mothballs. He spent the first few days simply exploring, mapping out the geography of his new domain. The library was a collector's dream, filled with leather-bound books that crumbled at the touch. The parlor held a grand piano that was horribly out of tune, but it was the gallery on the second floor that held his attention. It ran the length of the house, lined with portraits of the Marlow family, each one a testament to their long, storied history. The faces stared back at him, stern, proud, and distant. His great-aunt Eleanor was there, a portrait painted when she was a young woman, her smile a thin, enigmatic line. The first oddity appeared on the third evening. He was sorting through some old boxes in the attic when a sudden gust of wind slammed a window shut. He went to check it, and as he turned back, a framed photograph on a small side table caught his eye. It hadn't been there before. Or had it? He was sure he'd gone through all the boxes, and nothing of this size was out in the open. It was a faded, sepia-toned picture of a young boy, no older than 5 or 6. He was smiling, but there was an unnatural stillness to his eyes. Alex picked it up. The frame was old, the wood smooth and worn. On the back, written in elegant spidery script, were the words, Elias Marlow, 1923. A distant relative, perhaps. He placed it back on the table and went downstairs. Later that night, the house groaned around him. The floorboards above his head creaked, and he heard a soft, rhythmic tapping sound, like a child's footsteps. He told himself it was just the wind, the old house settling. He was in an unfamiliar environment, and his mind was playing tricks on him. He was a man of reason, an engineer by training. Ghosts and spirits were not in his lexicon, but the tapping persisted, moving from room to room above him, a steady, deliberate beat. He couldn't shake the image of the boy in the photograph. Elias. The next morning he found the photograph had been moved. It was now propped against the base of the grand piano in the parlor, directly under his great-aunt Eleanor's portrait. A wave of cold dread washed over him. He knew he hadn't put it there. He remembered placing it back on the side table in the attic. He picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly. The boy's eyes in the picture seemed to follow him. He forced a rational explanation. Maybe he had been tired, and he had accidentally taken it downstairs himself, then forgotten. It was the only logical answer. But the logical answers started to crumble when a letter arrived a few days later. It was from a law firm, sealed and official. The document inside was a copy of his great-aunt Eleanor's will, with a new codicil attached. It detailed her final wishes regarding the house. She had left instructions for him to find a specific portrait and bring it to her lawyer, a man named Arthur Finch. The portrait was of his great-grandfather, Arthur Marlow. According to the will, Arthur's portrait was not to be displayed with the others in the gallery. It was to be kept in a locked room in the basement, hidden behind a false wall. His great-aunt had been specific, almost obsessively so, about this detail. The will also mentioned a key, a small, ornate skeleton key that would be found in a locket she always wore around her neck. He remembered the locket. It was a silver heart-shaped piece she had worn since before he could remember. He had seen it on her at the funeral. but he hadn't seen it since. The will said the locket and its contents would be with her personal effects, which had been sent to the law firm for safekeeping. The next morning, as he walked past the gallery, he stopped dead in his tracks. The portraits were all as he remembered, but something was wrong with his great-aunt Eleanor's. The portrait itself was fine, but lying on the floor directly beneath it was the photograph of Elias. He hadn't touched it since he'd put it on the piano. How could it have moved? His heart pounded in his chest. He looked around the empty gallery, his skin crawling. The house was silent. He bent down and picked up the photo. He studied the boy's face again. This time, the stillness in his eyes seemed less a product of the old photograph and more a chilling absence of life. An eerie, hollow emptiness. As he held the picture, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his sister, Sarah. They hadn't spoken much since he'd moved, but she knew he was at the house. The message was simple and short. "Hey, I had a weird dream last night. You were in a giant old house and a little boy was staring at you from a photo. It was so real it freaked me out. Are you okay?" He didn't reply immediately. He couldn't. The coincidence was too unsettling. He felt the weight of the old house pressing in on him, the whispers of the past turning into a suffocating presence. The photograph of Elias, the strange clause in the will, his sister's dream. It all felt connected, a tapestry of unease woven around him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He needed to find the key, and he needed to find the portrait of Arthur Marlow. He had a feeling that the answers to all these unsettling questions were hidden behind that false wall in the basement. The air in the gallery grew colder. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. It was the chill of a presence. He had to be strong, he told himself. He was a man of logic, and this was nothing more than a series of bizarre coincidences. But as he looked up at his great-aunt Eleanor's portrait, he could have sworn her lips, once a thin, enigmatic line, had curled into a faint, knowing smile. A smile that seemed to say, "Welcome home, Alex. You have no idea what you've walked into." If you're enjoying this story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. The weight of his great-aunt Eleanor's secret felt heavier than the old house itself. Alex drove to the law firm in a daze. The image of Elias's portrait seared into his mind. The firm was housed in a modern glass building in the heart of Portland, a stark contrast to the decaying grandeur of the Marlow estate. Arthur Finch was a man in his late 60s, with a kindly face and a suit that looked a size too big for his wiry frame. He shook Alex's hand with a firm, practiced grip. "Alex, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your great-aunt spoke of you often. She was a remarkable woman," Finch said, gesturing for him to sit in a plush leather chair. The office was tidy and smelled of old books and lemon polish. Alex got straight to the point. "Mr. Finch, I received a copy of the will with a new codicil. It mentions a portrait and a key. She said the key would be in a locket she wore." Finch's face registered a flicker of surprise, a brief furrowing of his brow before he composed himself. Yes. The locket. Eleanor was very particular about that. She insisted it be delivered directly to you. It's in the box with her personal effects. I wasn't told to open it or look inside." He stood and went to a small safe, pulling out a sealed, dark wooden box. It was a simple, elegant box, polished to a high shine. Finch placed it on the desk and slid it toward Alex. "Everything she wanted you to have is in there. The will specifies you must open it alone." Alex's hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside, on a bed of faded velvet, lay the silver heart-shaped locket. He recognized it instantly. Next to it was a small, tightly folded piece of paper. He picked up the locket and unclasped it. The tiny skeleton key was inside, nestled against a small, intricate carving of a spider. The paper felt like a second clue. He unfolded it. It was a letter, written in his great-aunt's familiar, elegant script. "My dearest Alex, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. I hope you found the house, and I hope you are well. There are things you need to know, secrets of our family that I could never speak of openly. The portrait of your great-grandfather, Arthur Marlow, is not to be displayed with the others. It must remain hidden. He was a man consumed by darkness, a darkness that infects our bloodline. He believed he could control life and death, and he tried to cheat fate. The portrait is not just a painting, it is a manifestation of his ambition. The key you hold opens the lock to the sub-basement, a part of the house that has been sealed off for generations. You must find a false wall behind the old wine cellar. There, you will find a door. Do not go down there alone, Alex. The things he did, the things he kept, they are not for the faint of heart. You must find someone you trust, someone who will stand with you. Be careful, my dear boy. The portraits are his eyes, and the house is his cage. Do not let him out. Do not let him see you. You must destroy the portrait, but not yet. The time will come. First, you must understand. Your loving great-aunt. Eleanor. Alex's blood ran cold. He read the letter twice, his mind struggling to process the cryptic message, a manifestation of his ambition. The portraits are his eyes. Do not let him out. It sounded like madness. His great-aunt had been a quirky, eccentric woman, but this was a different level entirely. The words, "Do not let him see you," echoed in his head, immediately bringing the photograph of Elias to the forefront of his mind. He folded the letter, his heart pounding. The coincidences had stopped being coincidences. This was a direct, terrifying warning. He left the law firm in a daze, the wooden box clutched in his hands. The city seemed too bright, too loud. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a sense of eyes on his back. He called his sister Sarah and asked if she could drive up to Maine. He didn't mention the letter, just that he needed her help with something important at the house. Her cheerful, "Of course, be there tomorrow afternoon," was a small anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Back at the house, the atmosphere had changed. It felt charged, like a room before a lightning strike. He went straight to the basement. It was a vast, damp space, filled with forgotten relics of the Marlow family, broken furniture, rusted tools, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. The letter mentioned a sub-basement and a false wall. He found the old wine cellar, its racks empty and covered in cobwebs. He ran his hands along the stone walls, feeling for any inconsistencies. His fingers brushed against a section of wall that felt different, a slight unevenness he hadn't noticed before. He pushed. Nothing. He leaned against it, putting his full weight on it, and felt a slight give. With a groaning sigh, the wall shifted. It wasn't a false wall, but a massive rotating stone door, perfectly disguised. The gap revealed a dark, narrow staircase leading down into blackness. The air that rushed up from the sub-basement was cold and smelled of damp earth and something else he couldn't quite place. A sickly, sweet smell, like decay mixed with old perfume. He pulled out the skeleton key. It fit perfectly into a small, rusty keyhole on the door. He turned it. The lock clicked, and the stone door swung open with a shriek of grinding stone. He peered into the darkness, a shiver running down his spine. The space was utterly black, but he could feel the cold radiating from it. He decided to wait for Sarah. His great-aunt's warning, "Do not go down there alone," played on a loop in his mind. He went back upstairs, but he couldn't sit still. He went back to the gallery. The boy's photo was gone from under Eleanor's portrait. He searched the entire gallery, his panic rising. He checked the parlor, the library, and every room on the first floor. Nothing. He ran upstairs to his bedroom. His breath hitched in his throat. The photo was on his nightstand next to his bed. This was impossible. He had left it on the piano. He was sure of it. This was not a coincidence. This was deliberate. And the most terrifying part, the boy in the photo now had a wide, unsettling smile, a smile that hadn't been there before. It was a small detail, but it was enough. It was too much. The boy's eyes, once hollow and distant, now seemed to hold a flicker of malevolent glee. Alex felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. The photo wasn't just a picture, it was a warning. Each time it moved, it meant something. His great-aunt's words came back to him. The portraits are his eyes. But this wasn't a portrait. It was a photo of a dead child. He had a sudden, terrifying thought. What if the child wasn't a relative at all? What if it was a ghost? But he immediately dismissed the idea. His great-aunt's letter had been specific about what she called the darkness of the family, and it had to do with his great-grandfather, Arthur Marlow. There was a logical explanation, however twisted it might be. He took the photo and locked it in the wooden box with the locket and the letter. He wasn't going to let it out of his sight. He couldn't. He waited, his heart thumping for Sarah to arrive. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, a feeling that this was only the beginning. The house wasn't just a home, it was a prison. And he, Alex Marlow, was now trapped inside with whatever his great-grandfather had been hiding. The silence of the old house was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. Sarah arrived the next day, her bright, energetic presence a welcome antidote to the oppressive gloom of the house. She was a journalist, sharp and inquisitive, with a skepticism that Alex hoped would ground his escalating fear. "Wow, Alex," she said, her voice echoing in the cavernous foyer. "This place is a lot. Are you sure you can handle it?" "I'm sure," he lied, forcing a smile. He led her inside, deliberately avoiding the gallery on the way to the kitchen. Over coffee, he laid out the whole story. His great-aunt's strange will, the codicil, the hidden key, and the cryptic letter. He omitted the part about the boy's photograph for now, wanting to test her reaction to the more rational elements first. Sarah listened intently, her expression a mix of concern and professional curiosity. "A secret sub-basement, and a portrait of your great-grandfather. This sounds like something out of a B-movie," she said, but her eyes held a hint of unease. "What did the letter say exactly?" He retrieved the box and handed her the folded paper. She read it, her face growing serious. "A man consumed by darkness. The portraits are his eyes. This is intense. Eleanor was always a little eccentric, but this is another level." She looked at him, her gaze piercing. "Alex, are you okay? You seem jumpy." "I'm fine," he said quickly, then sighed, giving in. "Okay, no, I'm not. There's something else. A photograph of a little boy named Elias. It keeps moving. I found it in different places every morning, and the last time I saw it, his smile was different." Sarah's skepticism warred with her concern. "A smile? Alex, are you sure? Maybe you're just stressed. This place is huge and probably giving off major creepy vibes." "I'm not imagining it, Sarah. The photo was on my nightstand this morning. I put it on the piano yesterday." He pulled the photograph out of the box and showed it to her. The boy's face stared back at them, that unsettling, wide smile a stark contrast to his hollow eyes. Sarah's composure faltered. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand going to her mouth. "That's not good. That's really not good." She shook her head. Okay, let's do this. Let's find this sub-basement. Maybe the portrait will have some answers." They went down to the main basement. The stone door to the sub-basement was still ajar. Alex switched on his phone's flashlight, its beam a weak cone of light against the oppressive darkness. Sarah followed, her own flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The stone steps were uneven and damp. The air grew colder with every step, and the sickly sweet smell was stronger now, a cloying chemical odor. The sub-basement was a small circular room with a single massive wooden door in the center of the far wall. The door was covered in strange, intricate carvings, not faces or symbols, but what looked like twisted organic shapes, like gnarled roots or bones. The wood was dark and stained, and a thick metallic smell hung in the air. "What is that smell?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight. "I don't know," Alex replied, his own voice barely a whisper. "It smells like rust and something else." They cautiously approached the door. A single brass lock, old and tarnished, was in the center. The skeleton key from the locket fit perfectly. Alex's hand trembled as he inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked, a sound like a gunshot in the silent room. He pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room inside was a small chamber, bathed in a single faint beam of light from a high, narrow window near the ceiling. The air was cold and dry, a strange contrast to the dampness of the sub-basement. In the center of the room, on a high pedestal, was a single object, covered by a white sheet. But it wasn't the sheet that captured their attention. It was the floor. The entire floor was a mosaic of small, colored stones, intricately laid out in a circle. In the very center of the circle, where the pedestal stood, was a different design. It was a portrait, not a painting, but a mosaic depicting a man's face. The face was gaunt, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. It was Arthur Marlow. He was staring at the sheet-covered object with an intense, almost maniacal expression. Alex felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a dark, dusty room. Not this. Not this bizarre, ritualistic chamber. He and Sarah approached the pedestal, their flashlights illuminating the strange mosaic floor. They exchanged a look of shared horror. "Okay, this is officially 1,000 times weirder than I thought," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. Alex reached out and slowly pulled back the sheet. Underneath, a cold dread filled his stomach. It wasn't a portrait. It was a small, ornate coffin, no larger than a shoebox. It was made of dark, polished wood with intricate carvings on its lid. The carvings were the same twisted, organic shapes as the ones on the door outside. What is that?" Sarah breathed. Alex didn't answer. He carefully lifted the lid. Inside, on a bed of faded silk, was a small porcelain doll. It was a boy doll, with rosy cheeks and meticulously painted features, but its eyes were completely black, just two hollow pits. On its chest was a tiny, faded name tag. Alex's heart pounded in his ears as he read the name on the tag. Elias Marlow. Alex felt the room spin. The sickly sweet smell was stronger now, a scent he finally recognized. It was formaldehyde. He slammed the lid shut, his hands shaking. He looked at Sarah, his eyes wide with terror. The doll, the photo, the coffin. It was all connected. But how? What kind of twisted man would create a coffin for a doll? And why did his great-aunt's will insist on keeping it hidden? "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Now." As they turned to leave, Alex's foot snagged on a loose piece of stone on the floor. He stumbled, and his hand reached out to steady himself, his fingers brushing against the wall. A small, concealed button clicked. A hidden panel in the wall slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a small metal box. Against his better judgment, Alex opened the box. Inside, stacked neatly, were a dozen or so small glass vials. Each one was labeled with a name and a date. Alex's eyes scanned the labels, and his blood ran cold. The names were all of Marlow family members. One of the names, dated 1923, stood out. Elias Marlow. The contents of the vials were a fine, dark powder, but one vial at the bottom of the box was different. It was empty, and the name on the label was Eleanor Marlow, 2025. Alex's mind reeled. His great-aunt had died in 2025. Her empty vial. He looked back at the coffin with the Elias doll inside. He felt a chilling sense of dread settle over him. It wasn't just a coffin for a doll. It was a coffin for something else, something connected to the vials. "Alex," Sarah said, her voice filled with a newfound panic. "Look." She was pointing at the mosaic on the floor, the portrait of Arthur Marlow. As they watched, the face seemed to ripple, the colored stones shifting slightly as if the image were coming alive. Alex's blood ran cold. He had to be imagining it. This was the stress, the fear. But Sarah was staring at it, her face pale. He grabbed her arm. "We're leaving. Now." They raced up the stairs, slamming the stone door shut behind them, the sound of the locking mechanism a final, terrifying punctuation mark on their discovery. As they stood in the dim light of the main basement, their breath coming in ragged gasps, Alex pulled out his phone. He had to call someone. He had to tell someone. But who? The police? They would think he was insane. A historian? What would he even say? He looked at Sarah, her face ashen, her eyes wide with fear. "This is not a game, Sarah," he said, his voice raw. "This is real, and I think we just woke something up." The sickly sweet smell was now clinging to their clothes, a phantom stench that refused to leave. Sarah, a journalist by trade, was not one to be easily spooked. The moment they were out of the sub-basement and safely in the living room, her professional curiosity kicked in, overpowering her fear. She pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Alex, this is bigger than just your family's crazy secrets," she said, her eyes glued to the screen. "That mosaic, those vials, the coffin, none of this is random. It's a ritualistic setup. The smell, formaldehyde, and the empty vial with Eleanor's name on it. This is about something far more sinister." Alex, still reeling, could only nod. "What are you doing?" "I'm looking for any information on Arthur Marlow. I'm starting with historical records, local archives, anything that might connect him to this," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the basement stairs. "And I'm looking for any mention of a secret society or group that deals with—" "What is this? Necromancy?" "No, that's supernatural. Let's call it preservation rituals." As she typed, Alex paced the room, his mind racing. The photograph of Elias was still in the box. He couldn't bring himself to look at it again. His great-aunt's letter had said the portrait of Arthur was a manifestation of his ambition. What if the vials were connected to that? What if the portrait wasn't just a portrait? What if the darkness she spoke of was not a psychological affliction, but a calculated physical act? Sarah's search yielded a breakthrough. She found an old article from a local newspaper dated 1923, the same year as the Elias photograph. The headline read, "Marlow family suffers tragedy. Young son Elias dies in unexplained circumstances." The article was short, vague, and full of flowery language about the family's grief. It mentioned that the cause of death was never officially determined, listed simply as unexplained. A small detail at the end caught Sarah's eye. The family has elected to hold a private funeral and has refused to release the body for public viewing, citing their desire for a quiet goodbye. A private funeral? Refused to release the body? Sarah said, her voice full of suspicion. "That's odd. Why would they do that?" "He was a child," Alex said, a sense of dread pooling in his stomach. "Maybe it was too painful." "Or maybe," Sarah said, her eyes wide, "they didn't want anyone to see what he looked like. What if he didn't die of a sickness? What if he was the subject of one of Arthur's experiments?" She pulled up another article, this one a few years older, from 1920. It was about Arthur Marlow himself. He was described as a brilliant but reclusive inventor, a pioneer in the field of preservation and restoration of organic matter. The article went on to describe his work as groundbreaking but controversial, citing his refusal to release his full methods to the scientific community. "Preservation of organic matter," Alex whispered. The formaldehyde smell, the vials of powder, the coffin. It was all falling into place, a horrifying mosaic of its own. He wasn't trying to bring people back from the dead. He was trying to preserve them, to stop them from decaying. "But why?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. "And why hide it all?" "Maybe he was trying to preserve them in a different way," Alex said, a chilling thought forming in his mind. What if the portraits aren't just portraits of the family? What if they're a part of the preservation process? What if he was trying to capture their essence, their life, and put it into the paintings? And what if the vials are the remnants of his failures? Sarah stared at him, her face pale. You think he was trying to do something with their actual bodies? That's insane, Alex." "Is it?" He counted, his voice low. The empty vial with Eleanor's name on it. She died recently. What if she was the last one he tried to preserve? What if the reason the house feels so alive is because it is? What if the darkness she spoke of is his dark work, and the eyes are the portraits themselves, holding a piece of the person's essence? They sat in stunned silence for a long moment, the horrifying implications of Alex's theory hanging in the air. The photograph of Elias was a warning. It wasn't a supernatural entity. It was an object imbued with some kind of dark energy. A piece of Elias, preserved and now agitated by their presence. Sarah broke the silence. "We have to find the portrait of Arthur Marlow. The letter said we need to find it, but not to destroy it yet. She said we must understand first. Maybe that's the key. Maybe the portrait holds the truth." "It's in the sub-basement," Alex said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth, "behind the false wall. But we didn't find a portrait, Sarah. We found the coffin and the vials." Sarah's eyes widened. "Wait." Eleanor's letter said, "The portrait is not just a painting." What if the coffin, what if the doll is the portrait?" A cold realization washed over Alex. The doll of Elias. The coffin. It was a macabre, three-dimensional representation of a portrait of a dead child. But the letter said the portrait of Arthur was behind the false wall, not the coffin, Alex said, his mind racing. "So where is it? Where is Arthur's portrait?" They returned to the basement. Alex re-examined the stone door to the sub-basement, searching for any other hidden mechanisms. He noticed a small, recessed button in the stone, hidden in the grooves of the carvings. He pressed it. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, and this time, a small, barely audible click echoed from the wall next to the door. A section of the wall, made of a different, more refined stone, slid back, revealing a second chamber. This one was small and empty, save for a single small portrait hanging on the far wall. It was of Arthur Marlow, in his younger years. He looked much different from the gaunt man on the mosaic floor. This was a man with a full, pleasant face, but his eyes held the same cold, calculating glint as the mosaic. But there was something else in the room. In a small indentation in the wall beneath the portrait, a single vial rested on a velvet cushion. It was filled with the same dark powder as the others, but this one was labeled Arthur Marlow, 1927. "He died in 1927, Alex whispered, remembering the article. "He must have done it to himself." Sarah's hand went to her mouth. "He didn't just preserve others, he preserved himself. And the portrait? It's like a battery. It's the vessel holding whatever's left of him." Alex looked at the vial, then back at the portrait. The eyes of the painted man seemed to follow him, a cold, empty gaze that held no warmth, no life. Just a terrible, patient waiting. He felt a profound sense of dread. The letter had said, "Do not let him out." He now understood. He had not only found the portrait, he had also found the last remaining piece of a man who had been trying to defy death. A man who had turned his own family into his morbid experiments. And now, by unlocking these secrets, Alex had become his final subject. The air in the small room grew thick and heavy. The single beam of light from the window seemed to dim. The eyes in the portrait appeared to shift, the painted pupils contracting just slightly. A faint, low humming sound began to fill the room, a sound that seemed to come from the painting itself. Sarah backed away, her face a mask of fear. "Alex, we have to destroy it. Now." The letter said to understand first, but we understand. We have to destroy it. "No," Alex said, his voice strangely calm. He looked at the vial, then at the portrait. "We can't just destroy it." The letter said, "The time will come. If we destroy it now, what will happen to what's inside? What if it's not enough to stop it? What if we just set it free?" He thought about the Elias doll, the way the photograph kept moving. What if he was just one of many? What if there were other portraits, other vials, other things hidden in this house? Sarah's fear turned to a stubborn resolve. Then we find them all. We find every single one, and we figure out how to put an end to this, for good." Alex nodded, a newfound determination hardening his gaze. This wasn't just about his great-aunt's secrets anymore. This was about saving his family line from the darkness that had been buried for generations. The true game had just begun. The decision to stay and fight the legacy of Arthur Marlow was a conscious one for Alex and Sarah, born not of courage, but of a chilling sense of necessity. The unsettling discoveries in the sub-basement had proven one thing. They were now a part of this terrifying narrative, and there was no turning back. The photo of Elias, with its unnerving, shifting expression, had become a morbid compass, its movement a harbinger of unseen forces at play. Their immediate task was clear: to find out if there were more portraits, more vials, and more hidden chambers in the house. They began with a systematic search of the entire building, starting with the portraits in the main gallery. They meticulously examined each one, looking for any sign of a hidden compartment or a keyhole. The portraits were all of Marlow family members, a grim lineage of stern-faced ancestors. "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to a portrait of a woman in a high-collared dress. "This is Caroline Marlow. She died in 1930. The records say it was from a protracted illness. What if that's a euphemism?" Alex nodded, his mind going to the small vial of powder labeled Arthur Marlow, 1927. He had a chilling theory. He perfected his process on himself, Alex said, his voice low, and then he used it on others. He wasn't just trying to preserve them, he was trying to capture them, to keep them as his trophies. The search for more hidden rooms was fruitless at first. The house was built like a fortress, its secrets well guarded. But then Alex remembered a detail from a blueprint he had found in the attic. The blueprints showed a small, unmapped room next to the library. A storage closet, perhaps, that wasn't on the official plans. He and Sarah went to the library and began to feel the walls, looking for any hidden latches or panels. The breakthrough came when Sarah pressed on a section of the ornate wood paneling. It clicked, and a small door, perfectly disguised, swung inward. Inside was not a closet, but a narrow, dusty staircase leading down to a cramped, airless room. The smell of decay was overpowering here, mingled with a distinct metallic tang. The room held only a single dark mahogany cabinet. It was locked with an old, rusty padlock. Alex tried a variety of keys from a box he had found in the attic, but none worked. He finally resorted to a crowbar, and with a series of loud groans and splintering wood, the lock broke. Inside the cabinet, stacked on dusty shelves, were a series of ornate, velvet-lined boxes. Alex opened the first one. Inside was a small porcelain bust of a woman, her face serene, her eyes painted shut. A small card with a name and a date was attached to its base. Caroline Marlow, 1930. He opened another. This one held a small, silver locket. Inside the locket, a tiny, lifelike figurine of a man sat on a bed of velvet. The card read, Thomas Marlow, 1941. Alex's stomach churned. Arthur Marlow had not been content with a simple portrait. He had used different mediums for each of his subjects, each one a macabre, physical representation of his work. He was a collector of souls, a madman who had found a way to preserve his family members, their essences trapped in these twisted keepsakes. Suddenly, a loud crash from upstairs shook the house. Alex and Sarah froze. The sound came from the main gallery. They exchanged a terrified look and raced up the stairs. The sight that greeted them was horrifying. The portraits in the gallery were no longer hanging on the wall. They lay on the floor, their frames shattered, their canvases torn. The sight was not what terrified them. It was what was missing. The portrait of Eleanor Marlow was gone. A deep, bone-chilling cold filled the gallery. It wasn't just a change in temperature. It was an absence of warmth, a psychic vacuum. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and dust. It felt as if something had just passed through the room. It took her. Sarah whispered, her face pale. Arthur's darkness. It took her portrait. But why? Alex asked, his mind reeling. We were just in the basement. It couldn't have. It's not a person, Alex, Sarah said, her voice shaking. It's a force, something he created, and it's aware of us now. It knows we're here. We opened the boxes. We found his collection. He felt a profound sense of guilt and fear. They had disturbed something ancient and evil, a current of malevolent energy that had been dormant for decades. And now it was awake. He looked at the torn canvases on the floor, the splintered frames, and his mind went to the photograph of Elias. It had been moving, a signal of the growing agitation of whatever was trapped in the house. The photograph was a warning. The moving smile was a sign of its joy. It was pleased by their presence. It was watching, and now it had taken the final portrait of its creator's line. He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, his voice firm. "We need to get out of here. We'll tell them we found a secret room with a bunch of weird stuff. They won't believe us, but there'll at least be a presence here." Sarah shook her head. "No. If we leave, it will just follow. Whatever this is, it's not bound by the house. It's bound to the family, and we're the last ones left. We have to finish this, Alex. We have to destroy them all." Before he could argue, a new, more horrifying sound filled the air. It was a faint, high-pitched giggle, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the sound of a child. Elias's giggle. They looked at each other, their faces a mask of pure terror. The laughter grew louder, echoing in the halls. It was a joyous, innocent sound, but it was twisted, filled with a malevolent glee that made their blood run cold. They had been trying to understand, but the only thing that was clear now was this. Arthur Marlow had not just preserved his family. He had trapped them. He had made them a part of his sick collection, and now they were being released. Alex and Sarah stood frozen in the wreckage of the gallery, the echoes of the laughter dying down. The cold in the room intensified, and the hairs on the back of Alex's neck stood on end. He felt a presence, a weight in the air, a silent, unseen entity. And as he looked at the empty space where his great-aunt's portrait had hung, he knew with a terrible certainty that the darkness was no longer confined to the house. It was now free, and it was coming for them. The night that followed was a blur of heightened senses and creeping paranoia. Alex and Sarah barricaded themselves in the master bedroom, the heavy oak door locked and a dresser pushed against it. The laughter of the child, Elias, was a constant, low thrum in their minds, a phantom echo that made sleep impossible. Every creak of the old house was a phantom footstep, every gust of wind a whisper of a name. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice a fragile thread in the oppressive silence. She was hunched over her laptop, her face illuminated by the pale glow of the screen. "We find all the pieces," Alex said, his voice grim. "We find every single one of those things, and we destroy them. But how? What happens if we just burn them? Will it release whatever's inside, or will it just kill it?" "We don't know," Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard again. "I'm looking for anything about Arthur Marlow's work, anything about his methods. There must be something." Her research yielded a small, obscure article from a private medical journal, dated just a few months before Arthur's death. It detailed a new, highly unorthodox procedure for capturing and stabilizing life force. The author's name was redacted, but the description was chillingly familiar. It spoke of a process that involved isolating a person's essence, their memories, emotions, and consciousness, and transferring it into a non-biological vessel, such as a portrait or a sculpture. The process was described as highly experimental and irreversibly fatal to the subject. It also warned of unforeseen spiritual and psychological side effects, and the potential for a rebound effect if the vessel was ever destroyed. "A rebound effect," Alex said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "That's what she meant. If we destroy the vessel, we don't know what will happen. It could set them free, or it could just make them stronger." "Wait," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "The article mentions a control mechanism, a key to contain the essence. It says the key is a physical object, something imbued with the subject's own will and a unique biological signature. It says the only way to safely destroy the vessel is to use the key to deactivate the essence first. The vials, Alex said, a cold certainty settling in his gut. The vials of powder. That's the key. That's the biological signature. It must be a piece of their remains, a piece of their body. Hair, ashes, something. He took a piece of each of them and put it in a vial. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together, creating a picture of a man who was not just a mad scientist, but a calculated and cold-blooded killer. He was a collector of souls, and he had used his own family as his subjects. "We have to find all the vials," Sarah said, her voice filled with a new sense of urgency. The empty vial with Eleanor's name on it. That means she was the last one he tried, and it failed. The process failed on her. She escaped. And now whatever he tried to do to her is loose in this house. That's what took her portrait. But why the photograph of Elias? Alex asked, the question that had plagued him from the start. Why him? He was the first. Why is he the one moving the picture? Maybe he was the first experiment, Sarah said, her eyes wide with a horrifying thought. Maybe he was the first and the most successful. Maybe he's not a rebound effect. Maybe he's a part of Arthur's work, but not just trapped in a portrait. What if he's the unforeseen side effect the article mentioned? What if he's the manifestation of all the trapped souls, a physical embodiment of their collective suffering? Alex felt a shiver run down his spine. The innocent-looking boy in the photograph was not innocent at all. He was a monster, a composite of all the trapped, tortured souls of the Marlow family. He was the darkness itself. They decided to search the rest of the house for more of Arthur's work. The blueprints were their guide. They found a small hidden compartment in the wall of the master bathroom. Inside was another small, velvet-lined box. It contained a small, carved music box. The card inside read, Sophia Marlow, 1952. Another discovery followed in the library. Behind a false book in a hidden compartment, they found a delicate porcelain teacup, its intricate design covered in a thin layer of dust. The card read, Isabel Marlow, 1968. Each new discovery was a new layer of horror. Arthur Marlow hadn't just experimented on his family, he had turned them into his personal art collection, each one a grotesque masterpiece of his twisted genius. As the night wore on, the fear turned into a cold, hard determination. They had to destroy these things, but they needed to find the vials first, and they had to be careful. The laughter of Elias had stopped, but a new sound had replaced it, a faint shuffling noise, like something dragging itself across the floor. It was getting closer. The next morning, exhausted and on edge, they went back down to the sub-basement. They had to find the remaining vials. The small metal box that had held Arthur's vial was now empty. The vials of the other family members were gone. All that was left was the empty vial with Eleanor's name. A new wave of fear washed over them. Whatever had taken Eleanor's portrait had also taken the vials. It was gathering the pieces. It was preparing for something. But what? As they turned to leave, a new, more terrifying sight greeted them. The coffin of Elias was no longer on the pedestal. It was now in the center of the mosaic, surrounded by a dozen or so small glass vials. The vials were filled with the same dark powder, each one with a name on the label, the names of the family members they had just found. And then a new one, a name that made Alex's blood run cold. Alex Marlow, 2025. A new name, his own name. The laugh of Elias echoed from the walls, a high-pitched, triumphant sound. He wasn't just collecting the vials, he was adding a new one. He was preparing to add Alex to the collection. He was the final piece. They had disturbed his perfect, horrible masterpiece. And now he was going to make sure they finished it. The darkness that Arthur Marlow had created was not a collection of individual souls. It was a hive mind, and it had a new goal, to finish the work its creator had started. And Alex was the final subject. He's going to try and kill me, Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. He's going to try and put my essence in a vial and add me to his collection. No, Sarah said, her voice firm. "We won't let him. We're going to fight. We're going to destroy every single one of those things, starting with that doll." She reached for the coffin, her hand trembling. But as she did, the doll inside moved. Its head turned, its black eyes staring directly at her. And then it smiled. A wide, terrifying smile that stretched its porcelain cheeks. A single tear of blood rolled down its face. The room filled with the sickening scent of rot and formaldehyde. The shuffling sound from upstairs grew louder, closer. They were surrounded. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. The cold dread that had settled in their stomachs was now a hot, raging fire of adrenaline. Alex and Sarah knew they were trapped. The shuffling sounds were now at the top of the basement stairs, a sound like dried leaves dragging on concrete. It was no longer a phantom noise. It was real. "We have to get out of here," Alex said, his voice raw. "No, we have to finish this," Sarah retorted, her eyes locked on the coffin. "That thing, it's the key to all of this. We have to destroy it." They heard a faint, rattling sound, as if a small, brittle object was rolling down the stairs. A tiny marble came to a stop at the bottom of the steps, its surface a milky, opaque white. It was followed by another, and another. A slow, methodical trail. "He's trying to scare us," Alex said, his voice trembling. "He wants us to run." "Then we won't run," Sarah said, her chin set in a stubborn line. She grabbed the coffin, her hands shaking so hard she almost dropped it. The doll inside seemed to writhe, its head snapping from side to side. The nauseating smell of rot intensified, a cloying chemical stench that burned their nostrils. They ran back into the main basement, the coffin clutched between them. The shuffling sound was now directly above them. They had to find a way to destroy it, but they couldn't just smash it. The rebound effect. What if smashing it released the trapped souls? Suddenly, Alex's mind flashed back to the letter. "You must destroy the portrait, but not yet. The time will come. First, you must understand." They had to understand. But what more was there to know? The answer came to him in a terrifying flash. The vials. Arthur Marlow had created a way to deactivate the essence. He had used the vials as a sort of kill switch, a biological signature to contain the life force before destroying the vessel. They had to find a way to get the vials back. But the vials were with the coffin, and the darkness was now at the top of the stairs, coming for them. "The forge!" Alex shouted. "There's an old blacksmith's forge in the workshop. We can use that." They raced across the basement, the coffin of Elias held tight, and plunged into the workshop. The old forge was a massive brick oven in the corner of the room, its surface covered in a century of dust. Alex frantically searched for a fuel source. He found a small gas canister and attached it to the forge's nozzle. He turned the valve and struck a match. A low, sputtering flame ignited, then grew into a roaring inferno. The heat was intense, but they knew they had to be fast. They placed the coffin on the edge of the fire, the wood starting to char and smoke. The doll inside let out a terrible, silent scream, its porcelain face cracking. But then, the shuffling sound was in the room. A small, dark figure no bigger than a child emerged from the shadows. It was Elias. He was not a ghost, not a spirit, but a horrifying corporeal being made of dust and grime and rust. His eyes were not hollow, they were filled with the cold, malevolent glee from the photograph. He moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, his small hands ending in long, skeletal fingers. And he was not alone. Behind him, a collection of other forms began to materialize, their shapes vague and indistinct, but their purpose clear. They were the trapped souls, the rebound effect, and they were coming for them. "He's here," Sarah said, her voice a gasp of pure terror. "They're all here." The Elias figure pointed a long, bony finger at them, and a new sound filled the room. Not a giggle, but a low, guttural growl. A sound that was somehow both childish and ancient. "You shouldn't have come here." A voice, a strange composite voice of many different tones, echoed in their minds. "You woke us up. You freed us, and now we will finish the collection." Alex looked at the fire, then at the Elias figure, then at the coffin. The doll was cracking, but it was not being consumed. It was being reformed. The heat from the forge was not destroying it. It was solidifying it. The vessel was not meant to be destroyed by fire. It was meant to be forged. "It's not working," Sarah screamed. "The fire, it's not hurting him." Alex's eyes darted around the room. The forge, the metal, the process. Arthur Marlow was not a necromancer. He was an alchemist. He had been trying to create something permanent. He had been trying to forge immortality, and the vessels, the portraits and dolls and busts were not just holding the essence. They were being imbued with it, made stronger by it. A new thought, a chilling final realization came to Alex. The letter from Eleanor. She said, "He was a man consumed by darkness, a darkness that infects our bloodline." She had a vial, but she had not been preserved. The process had failed on her. Why? Because she had been prepared for it. She had a key. Not just the physical key to the sub-basement, but a key to her own mind. A resistance to her great-grandfather's perversion. She had resisted it, and in doing so, had broken the chain. Suddenly, the Elias figure lurched forward, its long fingers reaching for the coffin. Alex had no choice. He grabbed the gas canister and threw it at the creature. The figure shrieked, a sound of pure hatred, and dodged the canister, which clattered to the floor, gas hissing from a small puncture. "The vials!" Alex shouted. "We need the vials!" He grabbed a crowbar and ran back toward the sub-basement. Sarah, with a new, fierce determination, ran after him, the coffin still in her arms. They had to get the vials. It was the only way to stop this. They ran into the sub-basement. The coffin was on the mosaic, and the vials were all around it. The figure of Elias was right behind them, its shuffling feet now a running patter. He was closing in. Sarah placed the coffin back on the pedestal. Alex knelt and began frantically grabbing the vials, stuffing them into his pockets. He saw the empty vial with Eleanor's name. She had been the one to fight him off. She had been the one to break his perfect collection. "We have to use them," Alex yelled. He said the vials were a key, a way to deactivate them. He pulled out the vial with Elias's name and slammed it against the wall. The glass shattered, the dark powder spilling onto the floor. Nothing happened. The Elias figure let out a low, victorious growl. "It's not enough," Sarah cried, tears streaming down her face. "You have to do it to the vessel, not the vial." Alex looked at her, his mind reeling. He grabbed the Elias doll from the coffin. He held it in his hand, its porcelain face twisted into a grotesque smile. He looked at the vial of Elias's essence, still on the floor. He knew what he had to do. He had to combine them. He shoved the doll's face into the pile of dark powder, the porcelain drinking in the substance. As it did, the doll began to vibrate. The smile on its face faded, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated agony. The humming sound in the air intensified, a high-pitched whine that grated on their ears. The Elias figure shrieked, a terrible sound of rage and pain. It lunged at Alex, its skeletal fingers outstretched. But before it could reach him, the doll in his hand shattered, not from the force of the powder, but from an internal explosion. The pieces fell to the floor, inert and lifeless. The figure of Elias staggered, its form dissolving into a cloud of dust. The other figures behind him, the composite darkness, shrieked and evaporated into nothingness. The coldness in the room was gone, replaced by a profound, eerie silence. They had done it. They had destroyed the first piece. But the empty vial of Eleanor's essence remained. The portrait of Eleanor was gone, and the final piece, the empty vial of Alex's essence, was still in his pocket. The fight was far from over. It was just getting started. The shattering of the Elias doll was a moment of profound victory, but the triumph was short-lived. The silence that followed was not one of peace, but of a terrifying anticipation. The malevolent presence that had filled the house was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. The darkness, they now knew, was not just one entity. It was a collection of essences, a hive mind, and by destroying Elias's vessel, they had only defeated one part of it. "We have to do this for all of them," Sarah said, her voice filled with a new grim resolve. She began to grab the other vials from the floor, and Alex joined her, his hands still trembling from the encounter. They gathered all the small glass vials, each one a sealed testament to a lost life, a perverted act of love and control. But as they gathered the last vial, a horrifying thought occurred to Alex. The portrait of Eleanor was still missing. The vial of her essence was empty, and the darkness, the collective composite entity, had used its physical manifestation to attack them. Where had it gone? They raced back upstairs, their hearts pounding in their chests. The house was silent, the silence of a predator waiting for its prey. They found the main gallery exactly as they had left it, the portraits of the family members still on the floor, their frames shattered. But as they looked around, something was different. The portrait of Arthur Marlow, the one they had found in the secret chamber, was no longer in its hiding place. It was now hanging on the wall, in the space where Eleanor's portrait had been. Alex's blood ran cold. The portrait was not just a painting, it was the main battery, the central nexus of Arthur's twisted network, and it had put itself on display. It was a sign of a new kind of terror. It was not just a collection of souls, it was a consciousness, a self-aware entity. "He's here," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "He's watching us." The eyes of the painted man seemed to follow them, a cold, empty gaze that held a terrible, ancient intelligence. The air around the painting crackled with a silent energy. Alex looked at the vials in his hand. He had the means to destroy the other vessels. But where were they? They had only found a few of the macabre objects. The rest of the family members' portraits were still hidden somewhere in the house, a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Suddenly, a loud guttural scream echoed through the halls. It was not a scream of fear, but of pure, unadulterated agony. It was the sound of a woman. They recognized it instantly. Eleanor. The darkness had not just taken her portrait, it had found her. They raced to the master bedroom, their hearts pounding in their chests. The door was still barricaded. But as they approached, they could see through a crack in the door that the room was in a state of chaos. The bed was overturned, the furniture splintered, and in the center of the room on the floor was a single small object, a porcelain bust. It was of his great-aunt Eleanor, and its face was a perfect, silent scream, its eyes wide with a look of pure terror. The card next to it read, "Eleanor Marlow, 2025. Alex felt a wave of nausea. The darkness had not just taken her portrait, it had created a new one, a more perfect, more terrifying one. It had used the essence of her fear, her agony, to create a new vessel, a new piece for its collection. And it had done so by using the vial that had contained his great-aunt's essence, the one that was now empty. "He used her," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "He used her fear, her pain to create this." A low, resonant voice, a voice that was both Arthur's and many others, echoed in their minds. "You think you can stop me? You think you can destroy my work? I am not just a painting. I am a mind. I am the culmination of a century of work. And now I have a new piece, my finest piece." They had to destroy it, but they had no vial for Eleanor. The vial was empty. How could they deactivate her essence? "We have to use the empty vial," Alex said, his mind racing. "It's the only thing left. It has her name on it. It must be the key." He grabbed the empty vial from his pocket. He was still holding the other vials, a collection of souls in his hands. He grabbed the porcelain bust of Eleanor. He had to be quick. He had to do this before the darkness, the consciousness of Arthur Marlow, had a chance to fully form. He held the empty vial of Eleanor's essence in his hand. He looked at the screaming porcelain face of his great-aunt. He had a chilling thought. What if the empty vial was a final test? What if the rebound effect was a final terrible consequence of their actions? What if by trying to save his family, he was only making things worse? He had no time to think. The air in the room grew cold, and a low, humming sound began to fill the space, a sound of immense malevolent power. The eyes in the portrait of Arthur Marlow in the gallery seemed to glow with a faint red light. "You are next." The voice of Arthur Marlow echoed in their minds, a low, triumphant whisper. The final piece. Alex had a sudden, terrifying realization. The vial of his essence. It was still in his pocket. It had his name on it. Alex Marlow, 2025. It was a part of the collection, a part of Arthur's sick plan. It was not meant to be a warning, it was a promise. Arthur had a plan for the final Marlow. He had a plan for Alex. He had been preparing for this for a century. He took out the vial of his own essence and looked at it. He was the final piece, the key to the entire collection, the final experiment. He had to destroy it. But how? He had no vessel. He looked at the porcelain bust of Eleanor. The key was the vial. The vessel was the bust. The essence was her terror. But what was his? He had to find a way to stop it, to destroy Arthur's consciousness for good. He had to become the darkness. He had to become a part of the experiment. He had to give his own essence to the vial, to the madness of Arthur, and then destroy it from within. It was a mad, desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. He shattered the vial of his own essence on the floor, the dark powder spreading across the floor. He picked up the bust of Eleanor and the empty vial of her essence. He looked at Sarah, his eyes wide with a terrible resolve. "I have to do this," he said, his voice raw. "I have to end this, for good." Sarah, her face streaked with tears, nodded. She understood. He was going to sacrifice himself. He was going to become the final piece. He plunged the empty vial of Eleanor's essence into the porcelain bust, and as he did, the bust began to glow with a faint white light. The humming sound in the room intensified, a sound of immense, terrible power. The eyes in the portrait of Arthur Marlow glowed a fiery red. The fusion of Eleanor's empty vial and her new porcelain bust was a gamble, a desperate, final move in a game they were losing. The bust began to crack, the porcelain splintering under an immense, unseen pressure. The air in the room grew thick with the smell of ozone, and a faint, high-pitched scream filled the air. It was a scream of a woman, but it was not of terror. It was a scream of defiance. Eleanor's essence, a will that had resisted Arthur for a century, was fighting back. As the bust began to glow, the light grew brighter and brighter, a blinding white flash that filled the entire room. The portrait of Arthur Marlow in the gallery shrieked, a terrible guttural sound of pure agony. The humming sound that had filled the house stopped, replaced by a profound, eerie silence. When the light faded, the bust of Eleanor was gone, reduced to a fine white powder on the floor. The vial was also gone. They had done it. They had freed Eleanor. But the portrait of Arthur Marlow still hung in the gallery, its eyes no longer glowing red, but a cold, dead grey. The darkness was still there. It had not been destroyed. It had only been weakened. "We have to destroy it," Alex said, his voice raw with exhaustion. "We have to destroy the portrait of Arthur. It's the source. It's the central nervous system of this whole thing." Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and triumph. They raced to the gallery. The portrait of Arthur Marlow hung on the wall, its eyes staring into nothingness. It was no longer a symbol of power. It was just a painting of a dead man. Alex grabbed a fire poker from the fireplace and raised it over his head. But before he could strike, a low, whispering voice, a voice that was both Arthur's and many others, echoed in his mind. Don't destroy me. If you do, you'll be releasing us all. We will be free. We will be everywhere. You will never be safe." The threat was a final, desperate plea. It was a bluff. Alex knew it. He had a choice to make. He could risk it, or he could live with the constant, gnawing fear that he had unleashed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "I don't believe you," Alex said, his voice trembling but firm. "You're a monster. You deserve to be destroyed." He brought the fire poker down with all his might. The canvas tore with a loud ripping sound. The wood splintered. The frame shattered. The painting of Arthur Marlow was no more. For a long moment, there was a deafening silence. Then, a faint sound, like a sigh of 1,000 voices, echoed through the house. The air grew warm, and the feeling of being watched, the oppressive weight of the darkness, was gone. It was replaced by a sense of profound, peaceful emptiness. They had done it. They had won. Alex and Sarah stood in the gallery, the shattered remains of the portrait at their feet. They were exhausted, their bodies aching, their minds reeling from the events of the past few days. But they were alive. They were free. But the final piece of the puzzle remained. The empty vial with Alex's name on it. It had been left behind in the master bedroom. Alex went back to the room and found it on the floor, its glass cracked, but intact. He picked it up, his hands shaking. The label, Alex Marlow, 2025, stared back at him, a constant chilling reminder of the game they had played. He looked at Sarah, a question in his eyes. "We can't just leave it here," Sarah said, her voice soft. "It's a part of him, a part of his work. It has to be destroyed." Alex nodded. He took the vial and the shattered remains of the portrait and took them outside. He built a small bonfire in the backyard, its flames licking the cold night air. He looked at the vial, then at the shattered canvas. He knew what he had to do. He had to burn it all. He had to burn every last piece of Arthur Marlow's twisted legacy. He placed the remains of the portrait into the fire, the canvas curling and blackening as it was consumed by the flames. He then held the vial over the fire, its glass glowing red-hot. He felt a profound sense of closure, a release from the darkness that had haunted his family for a century. He finally dropped the vial into the fire. It shattered with a small pop, the dark powder inside catching fire and flaring up in a brief, brilliant flash of light. It was over, or so they thought. The next morning, Alex and Sarah packed their bags. They were leaving the house. They had to. The memories were too painful, the secrets too deep. They would sell the house, and they would never look back. But as Alex was about to get into the car, a small, faded photograph caught his eye. It was lying on the porch, a small, solitary object against the vast, empty expanse of the house. He picked it up. It was a photograph of a child, a boy with a wide, unsettling smile and hollow eyes. It was Elias. A cold dread filled his stomach. He had burned the doll. He had destroyed the vessel. He had thought it was over. But it wasn't. He looked at the house, a monument to a family's darkness. He looked at the photograph of Elias, a terrible final reminder of the game he had played. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he had not won. He had only survived. The darkness of Arthur Marlow was not a physical entity. It was an idea, a curse, a legacy, and it had found a new host. It had found him, the final Marlow. As he got into the car, a faint, high-pitched giggle echoed from the house, a single triumphant and utterly chilling sound that told him the game was far from over. The drive away from the Marlow estate was shrouded in a heavy silence. Neither Alex nor Sarah spoke. The oppressive gloom of the old house was replaced by the bright, indifferent sun of the Maine coastline, but the psychological weight of their ordeal remained. Alex clutched the photograph of Elias in his hand, its presence a constant, chilling reminder of the curse he had inherited. "We should go to a hotel," Sarah finally said, her voice hoarse. "We need to get some sleep, and then we need to figure out what we're going to do." "What we're going to do?" Alex said, his voice flat. "There's nothing to do. We destroyed everything, and he still came back. The picture, it's a warning. He's telling me he's still here." "But how?" Sarah said, her journalist's mind already dissecting the impossible. "We destroyed the vessel. We destroyed the source. How can he still exist?" "It's not him," Alex said, a terrible certainty settling in his gut. "It's the idea, the curse, the process. It's a disease, and it's in my blood now." He looked at the photograph again, the boy's smile seeming to widen. He's a part of me now. He's a part of the family. They spent the night in a small, anonymous motel. Alex couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the face of Arthur Marlow, a gaunt, cold face with calculating eyes. He heard the faint, high-pitched giggle of a child. He felt the cold, oppressive weight of the darkness. The next morning, as they were getting ready to leave, Alex looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. He was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and bloodshot. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. But as he looked closer, he saw something else. A faint, almost imperceptible detail. The corners of his mouth seemed to curl into a thin, knowing smile. A smile that was not his own. It was a smile he had seen before. On the face of the Elias doll. On the face of Arthur Marlow. He took a step back from the mirror, his heart pounding in his chest. He was not just seeing things, he was becoming them. The darkness had not been destroyed. It had found a new vessel. It had found him. Alex, are you okay? Sarah's voice came from the other side of the door. Yeah, I'm fine. He lied, his voice a strange new monotone. Just tired. He left the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bed. Sarah came over and sat next to him, her hand on his shoulder. We're going to get through this, she said, her voice filled with a desperate hope. We'll find a way to get rid of it. We'll find a way to break the curse. There is no curse, Sarah, Alex said, his voice emotionless. There is only a process, a perfect final process. He didn't just preserve his family. He preserved his work, his madness. And I am the final piece, the final experiment. He looked at her, his eyes now cold and empty, a chilling mirror of the eyes in the portraits. A smile, a wide, malevolent smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of joy, but of a profound, ancient satisfaction. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alex, what's wrong with you? Nothing, he said, his voice a low, resonant whisper. It was not his voice. It was a composite of 1,000 voices, 1,000 souls, 1,000 years of madness. I am perfect now. The process is complete. The work is finished. He stood up, his movements fluid and unnatural. He was no longer Alex Marlow. He was the culmination of Arthur Marlow's life's work. He was the darkness itself, a physical embodiment of a man's mad ambition. He looked at Sarah, a cold, calculating gleam in his eyes. He had a new purpose now, a new goal. He had to continue the work. He had to add new pieces to the collection. The final experiment had only just begun. And the first subject was his sister. The photograph of Elias fell from his hand, its face now completely blank. The boy's essence was no longer needed. The work was complete, and the final piece had found its purpose. The last laugh was not a giggle of a child. It was the silent, terrible smile of a man who had defied death, and in doing so had become something far worse than a monster. He had become a god of a dead family and a new, terrible world. The Marlow family's horrible story was not over. It was just getting started.